Hello, friends. Get ready for an exciting journey back in time to the Sumerians, one of history's most mysterious and influential civilizations. You've probably heard of them, but do you know the whole story? Today, we're diving into a world of gods, heroes, and the enduring enigmas that surrounded this remarkable people. We'll explore how the Sumerians viewed the cosmos, who they worshipped, and why they believed humanity was created solely to serve higher powers. We'll also investigate the lasting impact of Sumerian mythology on subsequent cultures, from Babylon all the way to the biblical texts. And then there are the Anunnaki, enigmatic deities that some today associate with ancient alien theories. Is there truth to it, or is it just fantasy? Let's try to find out together. Settle in and let's begin. The Sumerians were an ancient people who, in the 3rd millennium BCE, established one of the world's first civilizations. Their cities were located in southern Mesopotamia, in the area of modern Iraq between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These fertile lands, known as the Fertile Crescent, with their rich soils, allowed the Sumerians to cultivate grain and develop large settlements. Although the earliest settlements appeared here as far back as the 5th millennium BCE, it was the Sumerians who transformed them into true city-states: Uruk, Lagash, and Kish. Each of these independent states had its own ruler, army, laws, and patron deity. At the heart of each city rose a ziggurat, a massive stepped temple where priests conducted rituals and sacrifices. The Sumerians left no written accounts of their origins, and it's still unknown precisely where they came from. Their language is unlike any other ancient language, only adding to their mystique. Perhaps they were indigenous to Mesopotamia, or perhaps they migrated from other regions. The Sumerians were not just builders of cities, but also great inventors. They created the world's first writing system, cuneiform. Their texts, inscribed with pointed sticks on soft clay tablets, dried in the sun or baked in kilns, have survived millennia. It is through these tablets that we know how the Sumerians lived, what their laws and stories were. It was the Sumerians who devised the sexagesimal system for measuring time, which we still use today. They established the first financial system, kept tax records, invented wheeled carts, and developed the first primitive irrigation mechanisms for fields. But perhaps their most significant legacy is their mythology. Their gods were the actual rulers of the universe, controlling the destinies of people. The Sumerians believed that the gods created the world and then granted it to humanity, not out of kindness, but so that humans would perform hard labor in their stead. The Sumerians didn't just create some of the earliest myths in human history. Their religious beliefs became the foundation for the faiths of the peoples who succeeded them. Following the decline of Sumerian civilization, their legacy was adopted by the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. They adopted the Sumerian gods, altering their portrayals, but preserving the myths themselves. The Babylonian god, Marduk, who became the chief deity of their pantheon, was originally just a minor Sumerian deity. Later, he was elevated to a powerful creator god, eclipsing the earlier deities. This process is clearly visible in the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation myth, which is based on Sumerian concepts but reinterprets them. In Assyrian religion, the gods became even more warlike.
Marduk, the Sumerian god of storms and destiny, receded in importance among the Babylonians. But in Assyria, his place was taken by the god Ashur, a formidable and merciless lord associated with military victories and the state. Perhaps most astonishing is the influence of Sumerian mythology on biblical texts. The story of the Great Flood, described in the book of Genesis, almost entirely mirrors the Sumerian myth of Ziusudra, who survived the Great Deluge by building an ark. This same narrative also appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the protagonist encounters Utnapishtim, a man who achieved immortality after the flood.
The only difference lies in the details. In the Old Testament, the savior is Noah. In the Babylonian version, it's Utnapishtim. And in the Sumerian original, it's Ziusudra. Even the concept of the afterlife in ancient Israel echoes Sumerian beliefs. In Sumerian mythology, the souls of the dead descend to the underworld, where they dwell in dusty darkness. Their fate depends on the burial rites performed by the living. Later Hebrew notions of Sheol, a cheerless place where all souls go, resonate with the Sumerian world of the dead. Biblical depictions of heroes may also have roots in Sumerian texts. For instance, Nimrod, a mighty hunter and king, whom the Bible associates with the building of Babylon, could be a composite figure representing real Sumerian rulers, or the mythical Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, who performed heroic deeds, defied the gods, and sought immortality. Our knowledge of Sumerian myths has come down to us not through oral traditions or later retellings, but thanks to one of ancient history's greatest technological revolution, the invention of cuneiform. The Sumerians were the first in history to record their myths on clay tablets, using a pointed reed stylus. These tablets, sun-dried or baked in kilns, have allowed Sumerian myths to survive for millennia. These ancient writings not only recorded religious texts, but also served as repositories of knowledge. Consequently, many Sumerian tales were retold by the Babylonians and Assyrians, which helped them reach our time. One of the most crucial sources for Sumerian mythology is the Library of Ashurbanipal, a magnificent collection of cuneiform tablets found in the ruins of an ancient Assyrian palace at Nineveh. This library housed texts that recounted Sumerian legends, albeit in Babylonian interpretations. The most famous Sumerian text became the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest known literary poem, detailing the adventures of the king of Uruk, his quest for immortality, and his encounters with heroes of the past. It tells of the god Enki, the flood, the goddess Inanna, and the underworld. All of this makes the Epic of Gilgamesh an invaluable source for Sumerian mythology. For the Sumerians, the world did not emerge from nothing, nor was it created by the will of a single deity, as in later religions. The world was born from chaos, from primordial forces that existed long before the gods, the earth, or even time itself. First and foremost was Apsu, the infinite ocean of fresh water, the primordial being, the living embodiment of chaotic elements. Apsu contained the power of creation, but remained motionless and unchanging itself. Deeper still lay the second abyss, Nun, the dark subterranean waters, which the Sumerians envisioned as a mysterious place hidden from the eyes of mortals and even gods. Later, this concept would be reflected in Babylonian myths, and then in biblical stories about the waters of the abyss. In this primordial state, at some point,
the first gods emerged from these waters. Their birth was not the result of anyone's design. They simply appeared, like sparks from a fire. Among them were An, the embodiment of the sky, and Ki, the essence of the earth. They were not yet separated, but were a single entity, enclosed within chaos. For the world to exist, the earth had to be torn apart, and chaos brought into order. When An and Ki, heaven and earth, separated, space came into being, but the earth itself remained empty and barren, like a shapeless piece of clay. This is where one of the most important goddesses in Sumerian mythology comes into play, Nin-Her-Sag. Her name means Lady of the Mountains, and in ancient texts she is described as the great creator of landscapes. It was she who sculpted the first hills and uplands, separated land from water, and created the places where rivers could flow. It was her labor that prepared the world for the emergence of life. The Sumerians did not conceive of the creation of the world as an instantaneous act, as in the biblical tradition. Their cosmology is more akin to craftsmanship, a long process requiring strength and skill. Nin-Her-Sag transformed chaos into an organized space, but that was not enough. The world remained unsettled and infertile. It was necessary to establish order, create the structure of the cosmos, define who would rule this world and how it would exist. En, the sky god, was infinite, cold, and detached. He existed above all things, was the source of divine power, but rarely intervened in the affairs of the world. Ki, the earth goddess, was firm, fertile, and teeming with life. Together, they formed the basis of the cosmos, but they remained a single entity. Their separation did not happen by itself. It was an act of force, a deliberate step that had consequences. This is where a new important figure in Sumerian mythology appears: Enlil. Enlil was the son of En and Ki, but unlike his father, he was not detached. He was the force of wind, storms, and movement. Enlil could not tolerate the stillness between heaven and earth. He tore the bond between En and Ki, lifted the sky upwards, and pressed the earth down. This moment in Sumerian mythology can be compared to the separation of light and darkness, chaos and order in the myths of other cultures. Enlil enabled the world to exist as we know it. But with the separation of the cosmos, a struggle for power began. Enlil, taking on the role of the order creator, declared himself the supreme god. But he was not the only contender for the throne. Alongside him existed Enki, the god of wisdom, water, and secret knowledge. Enki was not a warrior, but he possessed cunning, deep wisdom, and an understanding of the laws. He knew how to circumvent them, how to alter reality itself without brute force. These two gods became the main forces of the Sumerian pantheon. Their struggle determined the fates of gods, humans, and the entire earth. Enlil demanded order. Enki sought hidden paths. Ki gave life. An remained distant, high in the heavens, observing what happened below. After exploring the Sumerian concept of the world's creation, let's delve deeper into the Sumerian pantheon. At the very apex of the cosmos stood An, the greatest and most incomprehensible god, the lord of the boundless sky. He did not interfere in mortal affairs, did not descend to earth, and did not participate in the schemes of other gods. His power was absolute, but he ruled from afar, like a distant star shining high above. He was the source of divine power, from whom the authority of all other gods originated. Without his approval, no one could be considered a legitimate ruler. In ancient texts, his name was used as a symbol of supreme authority, but he himself rarely appeared in myths. He was a god to whom not humans, but only gods addressed themselves when the destinies of the cosmos were being decided. His throne was located at the very summit of the firmament, in the highest of the celestial realms. Although considered the father of the gods, his authority was largely symbolic. He did not rule the world directly, but delegated this role to others.
This is why his children, primarily Enlil, became the main active forces. Enlil did not just rule the world, he protected it. He ensured that everything happened according to the established order, that the gods received sacrifices, and that humans fulfilled their roles. But if anyone disrupted this order, Enlil was merciless. One of the most striking examples of his wrath was the Great Flood, an event that the Sumerians described long before the biblical narrative. In this myth, Enlil decided to wipe humanity off the face of the earth. But not all gods agreed with his decision. In Sumerian myths, humans appeared not as beloved creations of the gods, but as their servants. They were meant to work for the gods, build temples, bring sacrifices, and praise their celestial lords. Humans performed the hard labor that the gods themselves previously had to do. But over time, their numbers grew, and with them, the noise they created. The Sumerian gods were kings, and they were annoyed that the earth was filled with the shouts, conversations, and clamor of people. One myth recounts that Enlil, in anger, complained to the other gods, "Humans are making noise. Their voices disturb my sleep." And so he decided to destroy them once and for all. Having convinced the other gods that humanity had become too restless and needed to be wiped off the face of the earth, they decided to send the Great Flood to engulf the cities, destroy the crops, drown the livestock, and wash away all civilization. But not all gods agreed with this decision. Enki, the god of water and wisdom, was a friend to humans. He did not wish for their demise, but he could not openly oppose Enlil, so he acted differently. Enki chose one man, the righteous king Ziusudra, who was the prototype for Noah. He appeared to him in a dream and warned him of the impending catastrophe. "Destroy your house and build a ship. Take with you seeds of all plants and all animals that exist on earth. When the flood comes, you will save life." Ziusudra followed the advice and built a huge ship. When the flood began, the waters poured down from the heavens and inundated the entire earth. The myth tells us that the flood lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. The waves were so high that even the peaks of the ziggurats disappeared under the water. People drowned, cities were destroyed, and it seemed as if life was about to end. Ziusudra sent out birds to check if it was safe to disembark. When one did not return, he realized that the land had reappeared from beneath the water. But when Enlil learned that someone had survived, he flew into a rage. He demanded an explanation. Who dared to violate my will? Who saved the humans whom I wished to destroy?
Enki did not hide the truth. He told Enlil that he could not allow humanity to perish entirely. Enlil was angry at first, but then he admitted that the flood had not destroyed humanity and gave them a new chance. As a reward for his righteousness, Ziusudra was granted immortality. The gods took him to distant lands where he could live forever, far from mortals. Among all the Sumerian gods, there is no one more vibrant and contradictory than Inanna. She would become Ishtar, but her character and role would remain unchanged. She was the embodiment of life itself, love, passion, fertility, but also war, destruction, and power. She was revered as a goddess who could make a king great, grant him victory, and bless the land with harvest. But she was also feared because she could become angry in an instant. Inanna ruled not only the heavens, but also human hearts. In her temples, kings and warriors, farmers and priests, temple prostitutes, and ordinary people seeking her blessing worshipped her. Her cult was special, unlike others. It was not built solely on fear of the goddess or pleas for mercy. Worship of Inanna was life, emotions, physicality. In her temples, music played, people sang and danced, performing sacred rituals meant to convey their devotion to the goddess. The rites in her honor were not limited to sacrifices, as with other gods.
Entire plays and mysteries were dedicated to her, recreating her myths, love, and passion. One of the most important rituals was the sacred marriage ceremony. Every year during the spring festival, the king of Sumer entered into a symbolic union with Inanna. He was to become her beloved, her chosen one. In the temple, a solemn ceremony took place, during which the high priestess, representing the goddess herself, joined the king in a sacred act of the divine and the earthly. This rite was considered essential for the prosperity of the country. If the goddess accepted the king, the land became fertile, the harvest was abundant, and the kingdom could flourish. If he displeased her, it could mean drought, famine, disease, and war. The worship of Inanna also included the cult of priestesses who served in her temples. These women not only prayed and performed rites, but also embodied the goddess herself. They were considered her earthly manifestations, her messengers. Their touch, their words, their dances, all were considered sacred, filled with power. Inanna's name was written on clay tablets along with prayers and requests. She was depicted as a lioness with paws and wings, wearing a crown, holding a bow and arrows, ready to both defend and attack. But for all her power, Inanna was not immune to fate. Like any other being, she too had to confront what lies beyond life, the world of death. The myth of Inanna's descent into the underworld is one of the most enigmatic and dramatic stories of the ancient world. Why did a goddess who was the embodiment of life decide to journey to the realm of the dead? Some versions suggest she wanted to assert her claim to power even where her sister Ereshkigal reigned. Others argue she descended to mourn the death of her husband. Whatever the reason, her journey became a trial that changed the very course of the cosmos. Before embarking on her journey to the underworld, Inanna prepared herself. She knew it was a dangerous undertaking and instructed her loyal servant Ninshabur to wait for her for 3 days and 3 nights. If she did not return, he was to seek help from the great gods. Inanna adorned herself with gold bracelets, her belt, everything that symbolized her power and authority.
She was ready to appear before the ruler of the dead in all her divine majesty. But when she approached the gates of the underworld and demanded to be admitted, the gatekeeper hesitated. He conveyed her request to Ereshkigal, who, with a smirk, agreed, but with one condition. Inanna must enter as all the dead do, leaving her power behind the gates.
At each of the 7 gates of the underworld, one item was stripped from her. Her crown remained at the first gate, her scepter at the second. Her jewelry, clothing, and magical protection, everything was taken from her, until, passing through the last gate, she stood completely naked before her sister Ereshkigal. Without a shred of mercy, Ereshkigal condemned her and ordered her killed. Inanna's body was hung on a hook, left in darkness. Meanwhile, chaos erupted on Earth. Without Inanna, life began to wither. Plants did not bloom, rivers did not flow, children were not born. Ninshubur waited for 3 days and 3 nights, then went to the gods, pleading for their help. Enlil refused to intervene, and An did not wish to defy the power of death. Only Enki, the wise god of water, found a way to save her. He created 2 spirits, unknown to anyone, beings who could enter the underworld but belonged neither to the world of the living nor the world of the dead. They entered Ereshkigal's palace but did not demand Inanna's release. They simply listened. Ereshkigal groaned in pain, complaining of her suffering, and then the spirits said to her, "We know what it is like to suffer." For the first time in history, the goddess of death heard sympathy. She was so surprised that, in gratitude, she offered them any gift, to release Inanna. But no one can leave the world of the dead without consequence. Inanna had to leave someone else in her place. She agreed. When she returned to Earth, her gaze fell upon Dumuzi, the god of blossoming and her beloved. He seemed to show no grief, no prayers for her return, no rituals in her honor. In her fury, Inanna unleashed the underworld demons upon him, and they dragged him into the darkness. Later, Dumuzi's sister, the goddess Geshtinanna, offered to share his fate. As a result, he spent half the year in the underworld and then returned to Earth, symbolizing the change of seasons. This myth is one of the oldest tales of death and rebirth, of how one cannot escape the darkness. When the sun rose over the Sumerian cities, it wasn't just a new day beginning. The gaze of the god Utu returned to Earth. He was the embodiment of light, order, and truth. His bright face chased away darkness and illuminated all the actions of people. Utu ruled over the sun and justice. As he ascended the sky, he saw everything: the dark corners of cities, deep ravines, closed houses. The honest merchant or the deceiver, the wise ruler or the despot, no one could hide from his all-seeing gaze. The Sumerians believed that it was Utu who judged people. He did not bestow favor like Inanna, nor did he unleash wrath like Enlil. His power lay in justice. He protected those who acted honestly and exposed those who lived in lies. Sacrifices were offered in his honor, prayers for protection were made in temples, and fair outcomes were sought in courts. But Utu was not just a judge. He was a traveler, a wanderer who performed his great celestial passage every day. In the morning, he emerged from the celestial gates and began his journey across the sky, illuminating the world. and in the evening he descended beyond the horizon to pass through the underworld at night. That is why he was also a guide for souls, one who could illuminate the path for the deceased, protecting them from the horrors of darkness. Myths of battles with demons and aid to heroes are associated with him. Once, he even helped Gilgamesh, the great king of Uruk, by bestowing upon him a weapon capable of striking down the monstrous Humbaba. His light was always a symbol of protection, strength, and the immutable order established by the gods. But if Utu was the light of day, then at night the world belonged to another god, Nana. If the Sumerian sun was the embodiment of law, then the moon represented mysteries. Nana, later called Sin, was the god of the moon, wisdom, magic, and prophecy. His light did not reveal truth like the sunbeams of Utu, but rather concealed it, leaving room for riddles and secrets. The Sumerians observed how the moon changed its form each night, from a thin crescent to a full disk, and then disappearing again. Therefore, Nana was considered the god of change, the cycle of time, the rhythms of life, and fate itself. The priests, believing that he revealed the future to those who could read the signs, were the best astronomers and diviners in Sumer. They studied the phases of the moon, calculated the times for sowing, battles, and festivals. Nana's dominion was a place of flourishing. He traveled across the sky in his celestial barge, controlling the flow of time, the ebb and flow of tides. His main centers of worship were the cities of Ur and Haran, where majestic temples stood, in which priests recorded prophecies on clay tablets. Nana was considered the father of two great gods, the solar Utu and the warlike Gilgamesh. Myths say that he passed on his wisdom to them. Utu received the ability to see the truth, and Gilgamesh received the power of authority. But behind the moonlight, darkness always lurked. As the god of the night, Nana was also associated with the afterlife, with omens and secret knowledge. It was to him that magicians, astrologers, and rulers who sought answers in the night's silence offered sacrifices. When the sun rose, its light could reveal the truth, but when it set, the moonlight brought answers among the majestic gods of the Sumerian pantheon. There were also those whose dominion lay beyond life, Nergal and Ereshkigal, the king and queen of the underworld. They ruled the land of shadows, a world from which no one returned. Ereshkigal's realm was filled with eternal darkness. There was no joy, no hope here. It was a world where the souls of the dead wandered in endless sorrow. The main city of this realm was called Kur. It was located deep underground, behind 7 gates leading to eternal darkness. The souls of the deceased went there and remained forever. Whoever set foot in Kur lost everything that made them human. There was no joy here, no light, no sounds. The souls of the dead subsisted on dust and dirt, knowing no hunger. The entrance to the underworld was guarded by fearsome demons who seized anyone who tried to escape. Even gods could not simply leave this place, as proven by the myth of Inanna's descent, when she had to find a substitute to leave the world of the dead. But despite the horror of this place, souls did not disappear completely. They became shadows of their former selves, existing in eternal monotony. Only those who received offerings from living relatives, bread, water, oil, and clothing, could preserve even a faint shadow of their former lives. If they were forgotten, they disappeared completely, lost in the boundless darkness. Unlike Inanna, the goddess of passion and power, Ereshkigal was as immobile and unchanging as death itself. Little is known about her past, but Sumerian myths spoke of how she was once abducted and imprisoned in Kur. From that moment on, she became its sole and eternal ruler. No one could challenge her, not even the most powerful gods. Her palace was located deep within the underworld, surrounded by demons and the spirits of the dead. Here she sat on her throne, receiving the souls of the deceased and observing their joyless existence. She was not cruel, but no one expected mercy from her either. Her power lay in inevitability. She was death itself, which could neither be appeased nor deceived. But even the queen of the dead had her tragedy. She lived in complete solitude. Unlike Inanna, surrounded by lovers, warriors, and priests, Ereshkigal ruled in emptiness. Perhaps that is why, when Nergal entered her world, everything changed. Nergal was not always the ruler of death. He was the god of war, destruction, and plague, existing on the border between the world of the living and the world of the dead. He brought death, but he himself did not belong to Ereshkigal's realm until one of the strangest stories in Sumerian mythology occurred. Once, a great feast of the gods was held in the heavens. All the deities came to pay homage to Anu, the lord of the heavens, except for Ereshkigal. She could not leave her somber throne. Then Namtar, a demon and her messenger, was sent to the feast to represent her. But when Namtar entered the hall, all the gods stood to greet the messenger of the Queen of the Dead, all except Nergal. He refused to bow to someone who came from the world of the dead. Offended, Ereshkigal, when he descended into Kur, Ereshkigal appeared before him, mighty, cold, but beautiful in her somber strength. She received him, but not as a prisoner. A strange, primal connection formed between them. Some versions of the myth say that Ereshkigal fell in love with him. Others claim they fought for power. She offered him to stay in Kur, but Nergal was the god of war, and he had no intention of becoming a prisoner of the dead. He waited for his moment, attacked Ereshkigal, and fled back to the world of the living, leaving her in rage and solitude. After his escape, Nergal returned to the heavens, but his victory was short-lived. Ereshkigal could not leave Kur, but her wrath reached the gods. She declared that she had been betrayed and would destroy the entire world of the living. The gods became frightened. They could not allow Kur to engulf the whole world, so they ordered Nergal to return. But this time, he came not as a prisoner, but as a conqueror. Nergal descended into the underworld again, but now he did not ask for forgiveness. He entered Ereshkigal's throne room with weapons in hand, broke down the gates of Kur, and killed her guards. When he reached her, myths say he grabbed her by the hair, dragged her from her throne, and prepared to kill her. But at that moment, Ereshkigal wept. She did not beg for mercy, but said that all she wanted was not to be alone.
She had reigned in Kür alone, while other gods enjoyed the world of the living. Now, she had met someone who could be her equal. Nergal looked at her, and instead of killing her, he kissed her. He realized that death cannot be defeated. One can only ally with it. Thus, he became king of the underworld alongside Ereshkigal. He could no longer return to the world of the living. He was now not just the god of war, but also the god of death. The Sumerians feared Kür, but they also tried to appease its rulers. Sacrifices were made not only to the gods of life in the temples, but also to Nergal, so that he would not send diseases and destruction, and to Ereshkigal, so that she would not take souls too soon. Commemorative rituals played an important role. Relatives brought offerings to the spirits of the deceased, so they would not go hungry in the underworld. The more respect a soul received from its descendants, the better it fared in Kür. Kings, priests, and magicians tried to predict how to avoid premature death. Many Sumerians even left incantations on their tombs to protect themselves after death and avoid eternal oblivion. But no matter how hard they tried, no human could escape Kür. All roads led there. Now that we have met the Sumerian gods, let's move on to the most enigmatic aspect of their mythology, the Anunnaki. In Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki appear as mysterious beings associated with the sky, the earth, and the underworld. They never act alone. They are impossible to envision as individual personalities because they are always mentioned together as a collective making important decisions. The most ancient texts state that they are the descendants of An, the sky god. This emphasizes their high status, yet they do not become the chief gods. They are not comparable to Enlil or Enki, the wise god of water. The Anunnaki are more like a council of gods that decides how the world should be structured. They gather, discuss, and approve decisions, but they do not participate in myths as actively as other deities. In Sumer, every major city had its patron deity. Enlil ruled in Ur, Nana in Ur, Inanna in Uruk. But behind these powerful gods stood the Anunnaki. They were invisibly present in religious texts, determining which cities would prosper and which would fall. It was their will that granted power to kings. It was believed that the Sumerian king ruled by the blessing of the Anunnaki, and if they turned away from him, the state would be ruined. The most famous intervention of the Anunnaki in human destinies is associated with the Great Flood. According to one version of the Sumerian myths, they convened a heavenly council and decreed that humanity must disappear. Enlil approved this decision, and Enki violated it by warning the righteous king Ziusudra. But despite their power, their status changed over time. If in earlier texts they are associated with the heavenly council, in later myths they are found in the underworld. Now, the Anunnaki are not celestial judges, but spirits who decide the fates of the deceased. They no longer rule cities or influence kings, but rather distribute destinies in Ereshkigal's kingdom. What kind of beings were they? They never descended to people, never engaged in open dialogues with kings, never taught crafts as Enki did.
They made decisions but acted through other gods. They were not individual personalities. They have no myths in which they display character or perform heroic deeds. They are judges, forces that stood behind great events but did not intervene directly. They created the world and then retreated into the shadows, leaving the more active gods to rule. If the Sumerians believed that gods were driven by passions, love, and anger, the Anunnaki were devoid of these emotions. They were the law that could not be seen but governed everything. They could raise a city to the heavens and then erase it from the face of the earth. They followed their destiny. People could not directly address the Anunnaki. Priests did that, serving as a link between the mortal world and the celestial beings. In the major cities of Sumer, there were temple complexes where priests tried to understand their will by studying animal livers. This was all part of a system by which they could ascertain whether the Anunnaki were pleased with how the world was arranged. In Sumerian tradition, the Anunnaki are frequently mentioned in texts related to sacrifices. People offered bread, wine, oil, and livestock. This was for the gods to maintain balance. The people of Sumerian civilization never saw the Anunnaki, but they knew that their presence determined everything. They did not wage war, did not interfere in love affairs, did not build cities, but decided which would endure and which would fall. The Anunnaki were the gods of order and inevitability, forces that governed the destiny of the world. The Sumerians sought to appease them through sacrifices and rituals to earn their favor. In recent decades, the Anunnaki have become not just ancient Sumerian deities, but also heroes of numerous pseudo-scientific theories that link them to aliens, ancient civilizations, and even genetic engineering experiments. It is said that they arrived from a distant planet, created humans in laboratories, and used them as laborers. But did the Sumerians truly believe in such things? And how accurately do these hypotheses align with real history? All modern theories about Anunnaki aliens originate not from Sumerian texts, but from interpretations made in the 20th century. The main popularizer of this idea was Zecharia Sitchin. In 1976, the American writer Zecharia Sitchin published the book The 12th Planet, which revolutionized the perception of Sumerian gods. You've surely asked yourself, why 12th? Because in addition to the planets, he also included the sun and the moon. According to his version, the Anunnaki were not deities, but extraterrestrial beings who came to Earth from the mysterious planet Nibiru. He claimed that this planet orbits in an elongated ellipse and appears in the solar system once every 3,600 years. When the Anunnaki arrived on Earth, they discovered rich deposits of gold, which they desperately needed. According to Sitchin, they used gold to create a protective atmosphere on their dying planet. But mining proved to be a difficult task. Then, the Anunnaki decided to create slaves who would mine this precious metal for them. According to Sitchin's version, they intervened in primate DNA, added their genes to it, and thus created the first humans to use them as labor in the gold mines. Sounds like a plot for an alien movie, doesn't it? But the problem is that not a single Sumerian text contains such claims. Everything Sitchin wrote is based on his personal interpretation of cuneiform tablets, and this interpretation is not supported by any professional scientist.
In reality, the Sumerians never described the Anunnaki as aliens, nor did they mention the creation of humans for gold mining. All of this is fantasy, lacking scientific evidence. One such evidence is Nibiru. According to proponents of this theory, it was an unknown planet that appears at the edge of the solar system and sometimes crosses it. However, archaeologists and astrophysicists state that Nibiru is not mentioned as a physical planet in any Sumerian text. In Sumerian astronomy, the word was used, but it referred to a bright star. Modern astronomers have used this name for Jupiter. Modern astronomical observations have not detected any Nibiru. Moreover, a planet with such an orbit could not stably exist in the solar system, as its gravity would disrupt the orbits of other planets. Ultimately, the entire theory of Nibiru is based not on real data, but on free conjecture that is not supported by science in any way. The Anunnaki, as divine beings, were not scientists or engineers. They did not build starships or use complex mechanisms. Their power lay not in technology, but in the management of fate and the balance of the world. No Sumerian text describes aliens, starships, laboratories, or gold mining for the Anunnaki. Everything we know about their role is related to deciding the fates of kings, distributing power, and ruling the underworld. But if all of this is a fabrication, then why do these ideas continue to capture people's imaginations? Theories about ancient aliens are very attractive because they offer simple explanations for complex phenomena. Many people, looking at the majestic structures of antiquity, such as the Egyptian pyramids or ziggurats, ask themselves, how could humans have created this without the help of a higher intelligence? The historical truth is that the Sumerians built their civilization themselves. Their achievements are the result of human intellect, knowledge, and millennia of development, not gifts from distant stars. Sumerian mythology did not place humans on par with gods. Humans could not compete with divine will, and their main purpose was to serve the gods, maintain order and harmony in the universe. Unlike later religions, where humans could hope for rewards after death, in the Sumerian worldview, everything revolved around earthly life. To prevent the gods from turning away, humans had to constantly care for them, build temples, perform rituals, bring gifts, and make sacrifices. But how did the Sumerians envision their origin, and for what purpose, in their opinion, did the gods create them at all? According to Sumerian myth, humans appeared not out of the gods' goodwill, but out of necessity. In the beginning, the younger gods themselves worked. They obtained food, dug irrigation canals, and performed heavy labor. But over time, they grew tired and rebelled against the elder gods. At a council of the gods, it was decided to find a solution, to create beings who would take over the difficult duties. Then Ninhursag, the goddess of birth and creation, took clay, mixed it with divine blood, and sculpted the first humans. But the initial attempts were unsuccessful. In some myths, Ninhursag experiments with different forms, creating weak, sick, or deformed beings, until she finds the ideal human form capable of working. Thus, from the very beginning, humans existed not for themselves, but for the gods. They were not granted immortality, nor were they given great purposes. Their destiny was simple: to build, to plow, to erect temples, to bring gifts, and to ensure that the order of the gods was maintained. In the Sumerian worldview, humans did not possess a divine spark. They were not chosen. Their role can be compared to workers on a vast plantation belonging to the gods. The world required care, and the gods themselves did not want to expend energy on maintaining order. They enjoyed eternity, feasts, and rule, but they had no intention of digging the earth, growing wheat, or harvesting crops. That was the task of mortals. Some texts explicitly state that the gods were freed from labor thanks to humans. This meant that any earthly catastrophes, droughts, wars, epidemics, were perceived as the wrath of the gods, displeased with how their commands were being carried out. To maintain order, every day priests ascended the summits of the ziggurats to perform rituals, light incense burners, and offer food to the gods. But prayers alone were not enough. They believed that the gods, although immortal, also needed care. They required food, drinks, and gifts. Bread, wine, oil, and milk were offered on the altars. It was believed that the gods were nourished by the very smell of food. Livestock was sacrificed so that the blood flowed onto a special sacrificial stone, and then the meat was used in the temple. Although there were no mass human sacrifices in Sumer, archaeologists have found traces of ritual killings in noble burials. In some tombs, for example, in the city of the skeletons of servants were found who possibly died voluntarily or were sacrificed to accompany the ruler into the afterlife. Sometimes gold, precious fabrics, and weapons were dedicated to the gods, left in sanctuaries. People believed that divine power permeated these objects, making them sacred. Fast animals for sacrifices, all of this was also considered a sacrifice. In this world, no one was alone. Every person, from king to farmer, worked not only for themselves, but also for the great divine order. The main temples of Sumer were huge ziggurats, giant stepped towers where priests performed rites, and people could bring offerings. The life of every Sumerian was connected to these rituals. Everyone understood that their fate depended on the favor of the gods. Every temple, every ziggurat, every sacrifice reminded them humans were created for service, and it depended on them whether the world would be in harmony. Every nation leaves behind legends, but the Sumerians created not just stories, they left the first epics in human history, which spoke of both gods and humans themselves. These myths explained the origin of the world, the destinies of the gods, the meaning of life and death. Among all the stories created in Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh stands out, the oldest literary work that can be called the first novel about the search for immortality. This is not just a tale of heroic deeds, but a story about what it means to be human. This legend was born approximately 4,000 years ago. It traveled from oral traditions to cuneiform tablets and continues to inspire people even today. In Sumer, kings were considered appointed by the gods, but Gilgamesh was exceptional. He was born of a mortal father, but his mother was the goddess Ninsun. Because of this, 2/3 of his essence belonged to the gods, and 1/3 to humans. This made him stronger, wiser, and more powerful than any human, but it did not grant him the main thing, eternal life. Gilgamesh ruled the great city of Uruk. His strength and valor were considered insurmountable,
But his character was harsh. He took whatever he wanted, oppressed his subjects, and they prayed to the gods for help. The gods heard them and decided that Gilgamesh needed an opponent equal to him. The gods created Enkidu, a wild man who lived among animals in the steppes. He drank water from rivers, ate grass, and knew no human worries. Animals considered him their own, but fate decreed otherwise. Shamhat, a priestess of Ishtar, came to him and showed him what it means to be human. He drank wine, ate bread, and experienced the joys of love. After this, the animals turned away from him. He became different. He became human. He came to Uruk, and Gilgamesh met him as an enemy. They clashed in a fierce battle. Their blows shook the earth, but neither could overcome the other. At the moment when they could have killed each other, they suddenly realized they had become brothers. From that day on, they were inseparable. Their friendship marked the beginning of great heroic deeds. Gilgamesh strived for eternal fame. He wanted his name to be remembered. For this, he decided to do something incredible, to travel to the cedar forest, where the terrifying giant Humbaba lived, guarding the sacred trees. They set off on a long journey, overcoming many days and nights of travel until they reached the forest. Humbaba was a gigantic creature, endowed with 7 auras, deadly forces. But Gilgamesh and Enkidu, with the help of the sun god Utu, who blinded Humbaba, attacked with great fury. They struck down the giant and killed him. Before his death, Humbaba cursed them. He said that for their actions, one of them would die before enjoying victory. Gilgamesh paid no attention. He rejoiced, but fate decreed otherwise. After their victory, Gilgamesh attracted the attention of the goddess Ishtar. She offered him to become her husband, promising power, wealth, and protection. But Gilgamesh refused. He knew that her love was a curse. Every lover of hers became unhappy. She turned men into animals and sent them calamities. In anger, the goddess turned to the gods. She asked her father Anu and the great Enlil to punish him. Then the bull of heaven was sent to Uruk, a monster that no mortal could defeat. But Gilgamesh and Enkidu emerged victorious again. They killed the bull, threw its carcass before the gods. But this was their last victory. The gods decided that someone had to pay for this. They issued their verdict. Enkidu must die. Gilgamesh could not believe it. His friend fell ill. His body weakened with each passing day. Before his death, Enkidu saw strange dreams of the afterlife, a cold, dark place where the dead wandered in shadows. Gilgamesh realized the horror of death for the first time, and then he set out in search of immortality. He left his city and traveled to the edge of the earth, where Utnapishtim lived, the only man who had survived the great flood and received eternal life. The journey was arduous. Gilgamesh passed through the land of eternal darkness, met the goddess Siduri, who told him, "You are a human. Rejoice in life. Forget about immortality." But he did not listen. He crossed the waters of death, reached Utnapishtim's dwelling, and asked, "How can I become immortal?" But the answer was harsh. "A human cannot live forever. Only gods are immortal." Gilgamesh was offered a trial, to stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. If he could conquer sleep, he could conquer death. But as soon as he agreed, he immediately fell asleep. He didn't even realize how he missed his chance. As a reward, he was allowed to take a flower of immortality that grew at the bottom of the sea. He obtained it and decided not to use it himself, but to bring it to Uruk and share it with the people. But when he stopped at a water source, a snake took the flower, shed its skin, and disappeared. Thus, immortality was forever lost from human hands. Gilgamesh returned to Uruk. He was no longer the same. He understood. It is not immortality that makes a person great, but their deeds. He looked at the walls of his city and realized it was these walls that would survive centuries. These were what would remain after him. Gilgamesh no longer sought immortality. He understood that true immortality is the memory that remains of a person. The Sumerians disappeared thousands of years ago. Their cities became ruins, and their language ceased to be spoken. But their mythology did not vanish without a trace. It formed the basis of Babylonian myths, influenced the Bible, and left its mark on ancient legends. Even today, we encounter its motifs in books, films, and games. Although people may not know about the Sumerians, their ideas continue to live. The Sumerian cultural heritage became the foundation for Babylon and Assyria. Instead of rejecting the old deities, Babylon reinterpreted them, making them part of its religion. Thus, Enlil became El, An became Anu, and Inanna became Ishtar, and Enki became Ea. Their characters changed slightly, but the essence remained the same. However, the most important thing was not just the preservation of the gods, but the rewriting of key myths. One of them is the story of the creation of the world, which originally belonged to the Sumerians, but in Babylon it transformed into a new myth, the Enuma Elish. In Sumerian texts, divine order arose from primordial chaos. The Babylonians developed this idea. Now, gods fight ancient monsters, and the victor becomes the supreme god, dismembers the dragon's body, and from it creates the heavens and the earth. The idea of a battle with chaos for the creation of the world became one of the main ones in Near Eastern mythology. It can even be found in the biblical description of creation, where God separates the waters and establishes order. In Sumerian mythology, the first human, Adapa, was created by the god Enki, but was deliberately not granted immortality. In one version of the myth, Adapa goes to the sky god Anu, who offers him the food and water of eternal life. But Enki warns him that it is a trap, and Adapa refuses and misses his chance. In the Bible, Adam and Eve also lose their immortality, only because they disobeyed God by eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge. The details differ, but the essence is similar. A human could become eternal, but missed the opportunity. The Sumerian idea of creating humans from clay is also repeated in the Bible. God created Adam from the dust of the earth, just as the Sumerian goddess Ninhursag molded humans from clay mixed with the blood of the gods. The Greeks, it seemed, lived far from Sumer, but through Babylon and Phoenicia, their mythology also absorbed ancient Sumerian imagery. Prometheus, who gave humans fire and rebelled against the gods, is similar to Enki, who helps humans against the will of the heavenly council. Heracles, who performed heroic deeds, resembles Gilgamesh.
Odysseus, who left his mark on history, traveling the seas and descending into the underworld, echoes the journey of Gilgamesh, who sought eternal life. Even the Greek Tartarus, where sinners are sent, resembles the Sumerian Kur, a grim kingdom of shadows where the souls of the dead subsist on dust. The Sumerians are long gone, but their stories continue to live. They became the foundation for subsequent civilizations, inspired religions, and created archetypes that still resonate in myths and legends today. But perhaps the main lesson they left us is the realization that although humans are mortal, their stories live forever. Thank you for taking this journey with me.
Thank you for your time, your attention, and your interest in ancient wisdom. The world of the Sumerians still holds many mysteries. Perhaps someday we will embark on this journey again. Until then, see you next time.